Neo's Fox by Vincent Darkfire, Chapter 4, Part 2. With Ospin. Headmaster Ospin watched the live feed as he took a sip from his mug. So I would like a new coaster for my office. Glenda, who was looking at the live video, enraged. She'd lost the bet. She never loses bets. How the, he, how? How did he do that? All of that without spilling so much as a single drop? The headmaster's assistant flailed her arms at the screen on which a looped clip of Naruto hurtling through the air, the coffee in his mug always perfectly level in the rim of its container. He even managed to take a sip without even a trickle dripping away from his mouth. Ospin smiled as he took a sip from his own mug. It's an Ospin thing. You wouldn't understand. The silver-haired man turned his eyes back to the screen with his newest students. Now, back to the teams. Naruto and Neo. There is more to them than meets the eye. With whom do you think we put them? I don't care. Glinda face palmed. She absolutely hated when Ozpin shrugged off his own victories like he could care less, or it was obvious he'd win. But I need to see more from Neo. Out of everything that's happening today, she's done nothing but cling to Naruto and sleep. With the teams, everyone present saw that Neo's eyes were open, wide awake, the three-colored girl snuggling deeper into his chest. Whatever, we have what we need. Now let's just get back to the cliff and get out of here. Everyone present looked at Whis. Run and leave. Now that's an idea I can get behind, John said before heading over to the pedestals, grabbing a white rook relic and joining the others looking at the cliff face there to return the relics to. Kneel, said Naruto as he watched the approaching Deathstalker. He shook Neo a couple times, her hair falling gracefully over her face. Neo's eyes blinked open and she looked up at her boyfriend curiously. Let's show these guys what we can do. Neo smiled a wide smile and blinked her accusations, blinked her acquaintances. Neo gently caressed Naruto's cheek and pulled him into a deep kiss. The demonic scorpion hissed loudly as it approached the two lip-locked teens. It pulled its stinger back as it grew within striking distance and radiated its deadly venom, pouring all its striking power into one attack, enough to topple large buildings. It launched its golden stinger at the two in less time than it took to blink. A red ribcage materialized and halted an all-forward movement of the Deathstalker's malevolent golden tail. Naruto pulled away from Neo and ran a hand through his hair, moving it away from his eyes. He was smirking. Then he widened his mouth to reveal a small, smooth orb about the size of a marble held between his teeth. The Deathstalker seemed to startle as it gazed at the little red ball in Naruto's mouth. The giant black scorpion moved to snatch the orb from him, and didn't even notice the ribcage sprout an arm. Oh, Shni, or Shni, Naruto mumbled past the ball in his teeth. Near her Shni, he paused and swallowed the marble. She brings animal out of me. Now fibers began flowing around the rib cage and arm. Another arm began to sprout as well. The fibers became muscles of whatever it was that began to form around Naruto, with a muscular formed an ethereal cloth began to form over the monster around Naruto. Sods formed on the shoulders of the ethereal figure, while hand coats formed over the creature's hands. The last thing to materialize was a fox-like skull that seemed to look directly at the now small-looking Deathstalker. The skull lurched back and angled to the sky as it used a haunting, ghostly howl that scared smaller Graham, and a few nevermore, even more, were even nevermore even were seen flying away from the sound. Finally, a hood formed over the skull. The only part of the skull that could be seen was part of the snouts and its glowing red eyes. The scorpion tried to pull away from the monster before it, but the creature grabbed the Deathstalker's tail and yanked it free of its abdomen. The wound it formed healing quickly. The Deathstalker began to make high-pitched screeches and hisses as Animal placed its other hand on its abdomen. The scorpion tried to break free by smashing the arm gripping its tail with its massive claw, but it did nothing but crack the bone armor covering its appendages. The group of teens at the ruins watched as Animal ripped the tail off of the Deathstalker. It's screaming, Blake whispered. The others barely heard her, but nodded in agreement. Naruto looked down to his lover. Shall we show this demon who is at the top of the food chain, babe? Her chocolate and strawberry eyes seemed to show her sexual want of her lover, like she was ready to take him right there. But she settled for a deep, long kiss. Naruto nodded as Neo pulled from their tongue battle. As you wish. And with those words, Animal lifted the scorpion like it was nothing more than a paperweight and tossed it over the hill behind the ruins. Naruto's fellow freshmen stood before. Naruto began to walk to where Animal tossed his prey, pausing his friends on the way. This might get a little messy, guys, he said. He walked up and over the hill behind the ruins, and they ran to watch what was going to happen. Naruto stood before the dazed Grim. As it gained its senses, it lashed out at Animal with its right claw, the one that wasn't damaged, and that earned it a new stub as Animal caught and ripped the appendage off too. Again, the Grim loosed its sounds of agony. Naruto began to mime movements, and Animal mimicked them. He reached down and picked up the dying Grim and began pummeling it into the ground over and over again. Naruto kept it up until the bridge they stood before crumbled into nothing and the Grim faded from existence. Ruby, Whis, Blake, Yang, John, Nora, Para, and Ren stood at the crest of the hill, mouths collectively agape in shock. Naruto single-handedly took down an ancient Deathstalker. He was something, and they all knew. Naruto is way out of their league. They're about to run down to congratulate him on his victory when a giant Nevermore shrieked as it flew towards them from the forest behind them. It sped towards Naruto like a bullet train. The airborne demon collided with all the force of a tactical missile. Dirt and debris scattered everywhere. Even more of the ruins crumbled around Naruto and the Nevermore. The teens watched the Nevermore raise from the debris field and begin to flap its wing in apparent victory. The flying monster's victory shriek was cut short, however, as the claw of the ancient Deathstalker flew from the gust and impelled the Nevermore through its chest. Caught off guard, the Nevermore flailed its wing, trying to coordinate itself. Animal's arms burst forth and grabbed the Nevermore's wings. The ancient Nevermore began to flail even harder as it tried to escape Animal's vice grip. The demon knew its death was imminent. You see, Naruto had a side of him that only Neo can bring out. Every time Naruto eats a dust marble, his powers become nearly immeasurable, but at the cost of his own body. Every marble he consumes increases his power output and puts unnatural strain on his body. Understandably, to keep his body vitally up, Naruto ties his physical form to Animal. When Animal suffers structural damage, that damage is mirrored on Naruto's body. If Animal loses an arm, Naruto loses the ability to use that limb for some time. Naruto glared at the Nevermore, and his sneer became a sadistic grin, and he mimed a crushing motion with his hands. Animal copied the motion, crushing the demon it was holding with like a piece of paper, and like a crumpled piece of paper, Animal tossed the dead Grim over its shoulder and into the chasm behind it. The fading body hit the tower near the center of the large gorge and destroyed it. Naruto watched the ruins crumble into the seemingly bottomless chasm as the dust began to wear off. The more it wore off, the more Animal faded from reality. His body grew heavy, that dive bomb from the Nevermore finally showing its damage. Naruto looked at Neo and smiled as a small stream of blood began to flow from his mouth. He took out his mug and was about to take a sip, but his eyes closed before he could. Neo took the cup before he fell to his knees. He turned to his friends and gave them a thumbs up before coughing up a mouthful of blood and falling face first onto the ground. Neo watched and took a sip from Naruto's mug. Her face twisted in disgust, but she shrugged and took a second sip, finding the flavor a bit more tolerable the second time around. With Ospin, the live feed showed the teens running to Naruto's unconscious body, a small pool of blood forming near his mouth. Neo was sitting near him, petting his ears lovingly. Ospin was standing at his desk, watching intently, his body tense. He wanted to go see if his son was okay. He didn't want to lose him like he lost his wife all those years ago, not like he lost the Kushina 18 years ago. No, I can't lose him too. Glinda looked over to her boss and saw not the usual calm and aloof man she used to see. No, she saw the look of a deep-seated fear in his eyes. The calm man she cared for has become a man filled with fear. Flashback of pain. A younger, healthier Ospin stood looking at a scroll as he sipped from his mug. It displayed the name of students and who the system believes would be a good partners for them, and their projected leaders. He sighed with his trademarked. He's trademarked it. Oz looked over to see his wonderful wife walking into his office. He smiled as he saw her tenderly rubbing her 9-month swollen pregnancy belly. She's due any day now, and she walked, her red tail swayed behind her in happiness. She walked over to him and sat on the edge of his chair and looked over the teams. Ozzy, why don't you put Itachi with this team? Changing the name to Idag. Ospin nodded his head as he took a sip. That would make Itachi team leader. I believe he'd be a great leader. Hell, in a few years he'd probably replace me as headmaster. He's such a nice boy, so polite to everyone. Kushina's face grew with a childish grin, bringing her hands to her face. What if he becomes like a big brother to our little Naru? Oz chuckled at Kushina's childlike antics. He looked at her as he pulled his mug and scrolled down, silencing his scroll as well. Don't want it getting in the way of his wife and his time together. All the whole school knew that a happy Kushina means a happy Ospin. Besides, the last time someone pissed off Kushina wasn't able to speak of it without breaking into hysterics, he would never look at Turkey the same way again. Osman smiled at his wife as he rose to his feet and walked to the large windowed wall of his office, his face twisted in deep thoughts as he looked out at the campus he leads. He never saw Kushina coming as she wrapped her arms around him and rested her head on his shoulder. Ozzy, why don't you take the rest of the day off and spend it with me? Osman knew that a man must take the time to care for his wife, and lately the paperwork has been piling up, he thought. as he looked at the considerable stack of papers on his desk. Transcripts. A night with my wife, or paperwork. Uh, the pile had at least 300 transcripts to go through. Yeah, let me get my coffee warmed up and we'll head out. He finally responded. Kushina jumped for joy and ran to get ready. Osman chuckled at his wife's teen-like giddiness. He walked over to a small desk near the edge of his large window and refilled his mug as he sighed. God, I hope our son is more like me. I don't think I could handle two of them. With a new coffee in his mug, he returned to his desk, waiting for his wife to return. As he waited, he looked at the framed picture of he and his bride. An even younger Osman standing as he looked at the camera, while Kushna had an arm hooked over his neck and gave the camera a beautiful smile and a peace sign. The picture of when they first met and became partners. Osman smiled, remembering all the time they spent slaughtering Grim and having fun. The headmaster picked up the picture frame and ran his fingers down the glass. Osman never noticed the crack that formed between their heads. Come on, Ozzy, he heard Kushna call. He put the frame back down, picking up his scroll and walking to his wife. He never noticed that the hairline crack widened and split the glass, dividing him from his wife. Time skip. Osman paced back and forth in the clean walkway, his mug sitting on a little desk with sweat visible on his brow and breathing heavier than ever before. His mind raced at ludicrous speeds. He couldn't calm down, knowing his wife was in agonizing pain. He could hear her cries of agony from behind the many walls and doors between him and his wife. He didn't know what to do right now. This wasn't a school, nor a grim attack, or a fangirl screaming. This was not some guy hitting on his wife. This was the most important moment in their lives. This day, their son, Naruto, being ushered to the world of Remnant. He tried to remember the series of events that led to this moment, trying to make sense of it all. One moment they were laughing and having fun. The next thing he knew, her water broke. Now here he is waiting in the waiting room, worried out of his mind, and nothing, not even his coffee, could calm his nerves now. He paced back and forth so much he actually wore a track into the linoleum floor. The nurses were all watching him pace. A few of them tried to make him sit and calm down. Those in the waiting room that knew him, previous or even current students, retired teachers, were getting some level of amusement out of watching the normally calm headmaster of Beacon so abnormally panicky and nervous. The head nurse of pediatrics threw open the doors to the birthing wing, and Ospen was on her like white on rice, in a glass of milk on a paper plate in a snowstorm. How is she? Is she okay? Is something wrong? Please tell me. He pleaded. The nurse looked the man over. He didn't have his glasses on. His hair was a mess. His shirt was unbuttoned and untucked. What stood out most to the woman was the bags on the obvious unrest in Ospen's eyes. Mr. Ospen, would you please calm down and show me the headmaster that we both know you are? Ospen tried to respond, but she cut him off. Right now, I see a man that needs to get his shit together. Until you pull yourself together, I cannot allow you to see your wife. Ospen was taken aback. The nerve of this woman. You can't do that to me. Do you even know who I... Yes, I can, Mr. Ospen. If I determine that your state of mind is a danger to my staff, patients, or your wife, I will have you removed from this hotel. The head nurse of pediatrics, uh, white black, had put her foot down, but Ospen tried to come up with a rebuttal to her words, but none came. No buts, Ospen. Nurse Blank said. Oz knew White was right. He let his head fall and his shoulders to slump. Oz took a long, common breath and stood up straight. He straightened his shirt, buttoned it up, and tucked it in, and running his hands over his hair. White smiled at the now calmed down headmaster. He walked away from her and grabbed his mug and took a sip, the hot liquid bringing calm to his mind. Osmond smiled at the head nurse as he walked back to her, taking a sip every few steps. Thank you, Nurse Blank. Now, may I please see my wife and newborn son? White smiled and opened the door behind her, ushering Osmond in. Yes, you may, sir. As the two walked down the hallway, more nurses and doctors were running down the hallway. The nurse watched to see what room they were running to, only to turn pale as she stood out. No, what is happening? As she picked up her pace, she was in perfect health when I went to get you. Her pace quickened gradually into a run. Osmond's calm was shattered as he heard the nurse's words. He ran to almost faster than the nurse. As he made it to his wife's room, he felt a set of foreboding emanate from the entrance. He looked into the impossibly bright room. His eyes adjusted to the light, and what he saw filled him with despair. He was about to speak, but a nurse stopped him from entering the room. I'm so sorry, Mr. Ospin, but your wife. Ospin's world was destroyed. His wife was taken from him. He will never again see her smiling face as he walked through his home. Never again taste her specially brewed coffee made just for him. He'd lost the star that had lit his world since he found her in Signal. He watched as the doctors covered Kushina's body in a white sheet. Before they wheeled her out of the room, Osmond spoke. May have a few moments before you take her away. The doctors all looked at Osmond, then to the sheet-covered body, and nodded solemnly. A couple of the doctors and nurses said their condolences as they stepped past him. Osmond now stood beside his wife's deathbed. He slowly moved the sheet down, revealing her face. She looked like she was just sleeping. He moved the sheet aside and grabbed her hand, giving it a gentle squeeze. You were the light of my life, keeping me smiling as the days moved on. You gave me everything a man could ever ask for, and never asked for anything in return but my love. I gave you everything I have and more. I gave you a son, and you gave me a son. I will always love you, my lovely fox, my red-haired habanero, my dear wife. His voice began to tremble, and tears began to stream down his face. Kushina Ospen, may your soul find peace and happiness. He gave her a kiss on her forehead as the tears dripped to her cheeks. It's a shame, truly. Ospen stood up and looked to the direction of the voice, where the voice came from. It seemed the room grew darker, as if the light itself was trying to keep the assassin hidden. His voice then began to emanate from everywhere at once. To kill something so delicate, have it taken from you all of a sudden, sad is it not, Mr. Ospen? Only then do you realize that your happiest moments led directly to the most devastating moment of your life. It makes you appreciate life as we know it. Husband looked around the room, searching for the source of the horrible voice, only to find nothing. His years of hunting began to fail him as he only saw darkness around him. He searched everywhere for the source. He found nothing but white walls and empty cupboards. He hung his head and slumped his shoulders in shame at being unable to pinpoint the source of the voice. Osmond gave his wife one last look before pulling the sheets over her head. Rest in peace, my love. Just as the sheets returned over Kushina's head, the room returned to normal, and the doctor walked in. For every dark cloud, there is a silver lining. As one light goes out, another is born. You may see your child now, Professor Ospin. Ospin was a broken man. He had lost his wife on the day of his son's birth. His head hung low as he was led from his wife to the room that held his newborn son. Your child is perfectly healthy, sir. The doctor said as he stepped next to the swaddling cradle that held his boy. Osmond couldn't help but smile as he watched his baby boy snooze in his cradle. As the small newborn child moved in his sleep, he revealed his small fox ears. The boy kicked his blanket off and showed a bushy foxtail twitching irritably. The baby opened its eyes and looked directly at Osmond. His father reached down and gently caressed his boy's head. My precious boy. My little Naruto. Flashback end. Now Osmond watched the doctors run back and forth around the room, keeping his son alive. The damage done to Naruto, even through animal, was immense. Most of the bones in his right arm and left leg were shattered, and he's lost a few pints of blood. Neo stood next to Osmond, for her face growing more worried as her lover's father showed more fear. Osmond put his hands on her shoulder. Don't worry, Neo. He will make it. After all, he is his mother's son. That family has always the kick to death in the teeth with a smile. He will pull through. The way he said that made Neo connect the dots. Her eyes grew wide at this realization. Father! The words restrained her voice. Osmond nodded at the girl. Indeed, I am his father. The silver-haired man smiled at the petite girl as he rubbed her head. After a small pause, Osmond looked at Neo. Neo, I have a mission for you. Her eyes lit up in anticipation. I want you to keep Naruto safe, happy even. This is all I ask. My son needs you. Neo looked Osmond in the eye, her white brown eyes showing her steely determination as she nodded her acceptance of the mission. Osmond smiled at Neo. If Kushina could see you, she'd fall in love with you. I know this may be too soon, but I think of you as a daughter. Neo looked back at Naruto. Her face was that of a woman determined to make her future father-in-law happy. A woman whom wanted nothing less than keep Naruto safe and happy. Neo gripped her parasol's handle, pulling out the thin blade hidden inside, just the slightest bit, smiling wickedly at it. No one, absolutely no one, is going to bring harm to her beloved Naruto. Neo returned her little blade to its sheath and looked at her boyfriend one more time. Her visage became skewed as she brought her hands to her face. Neo's eyes held nothing but love for Naruto, as she simply faded from view, like she was never even there. Naruto's room was eerily quiet, the chiming of the heart monitor being the only sound. The door silently swung open, and a shadowy head poked through the opening. The figure leaned back out of the hall, looking around. Seeing no one, she whispered to herself, "Step 1 complete. Now, step 2." The young woman slid into Naruto's room, silently closing the door behind her. Slowly, she moved to the side of Naruto's bed and looked him over. His arm and leg were set in casts, and his chest was wrapped in bandages. Naruto's breath was slow, deep, and most importantly, the breath of a sleeping man. After double-checking that her target was asleep, she pulled a syringe full of clear liquid. "You should have died in that grim invasion," she whispered to herself. "But no, you just had to live, and now I'm stuck with this icky job." The girl sputtered as little of the fluid from the syringe and ensured it was unclogged, and positioned it perfectly over Naruto's heart. One death, She pulled the needle up, intending to slam it into her target, coming right up. Her hand descended upon Naruto's chest like a nevermore. Blood splattered onto Naruto's chest. Another hand was clutching the syringe, stopping it just before the needle touched Naruto's flesh. The girl looked down to see a thin blade jutting from her chest and felt it twist and the slightest bit. She bit back a scream and her grip on the syringe slipped a bit. She slipped and a hand took it from her. The girl turned her head enough to see Neil beside her, one hand behind her gripping her sword, the other having took the poison from her. No fair. I didn't even sense your aura. Neil glanced her way, winking at her mockingly. The would-be assassin looked back at her mark to see the sly fox, undisturbed by any of the goings-on. The girl looked back at Neil, coughing up blood as she tried to breathe. Neil looked at her, tilting her head a little as a sadist grin spread on her face. She twisted her sword even more. More blood filled the assassin's lungs, and more blood dripped from her mouth. No fair. Rainbugs will not go out like this. She wiped out a small gun from her corset, taking aim at Naruto's head. Rain dimly felt the blade be withdrawn from her chest, followed by another splatter of blood on Naruto's chest. Then her world went blank. Neo stabbed Rain in the back of the head, the blade jutting from the tip of Rain's nose. Neo rinsed the blade upwards, cutting through her skull, making sure to finish off the bitch that threatened her man. Rain slumped to her knees, her split head hanging down, Neo using Rain's shoulders to clean her blade before sheathing it. Neo quickly gathered the corpse and plopped it into a bed. She looked around for a sheet to cover the body with. The small tricolored girl dug through cabinets and closets before finally finding what she needed. After covering Rain's body, Neo cleaned the blood from Naruto's chest and gave him a gentle kiss. Naruto's expression grew a bit more peaceful in his sleep. Neo gave the dead assassins a deathbed out of the room and down the hall to the elevator leading directly to the morgue. As the door opened to the morgue, she began to look for a toe tag. Obviously knowing the cause of death, she wrote it down, only altering it enough to fit a grim attack. Before attaching the tag, she removed the dead girl's clothing. Admiring her physique unashamedly, she smiled lecherously. After removing her clothes and the tag was attached, Neo needed a place to throw the clothes. She looked around and settled on the trash. Simple and efficient. After that, she moved the body to the gurney table and slid the girl into the freezer. Smirking to herself, knowing she just got away with murder, she skipped down the hall back to Naruto's room. Whoever said murder was hard to get away with. Meanwhile, Ruby Rose, Weiss Snee, Blake Belladonna, and Yang Xiaolong. You four have claimed the White Knight pieces. From this day forth, you shall be known as Team Ruby, led by Ruby Rose, Osmond said as he stood from the center on the stage in the ballroom. The silver-haired man, the silver headmaster, gave Ruby a small smile. Ruby stood in shock at being declared the leader of her team. Weiss was shocked, but for the opposite reason, at not being named leader. Blake was utterly indifferent. Yang was the most animated, wrapping her sister in a bone-crushing hug. Now about those students that are not present, Naruto, Uzumaki, and Neapolitan. They alone claimed that the Black King, Nusp, led by Naruto, they form a special team, a backup task force. The end of chapter 4.